Hi, my name is Kathy Lee, and I'm honored to be here today. Thanks to Sunyoung and the APNG committee for inviting me. It is very comforting to know that the next generation is working hard on improving technology for the rest of society. And it's amazing that we are all able to be here united by speaking in English, despite coming from so many different countries. I should tell you that English is my first language. Can you guess what country I was born in? Yes, I was born in the United States and I moved to Korea about 15 years ago. So I grew up with English as a first language and later I learned Korean. So I'm very lucky because I can use English easily without much thought. So it's incredible that those of you who learned English as a second, third, or even fourth language are communicating successfully today with others. I teach English to students in Korea, so I know how difficult it can be to speak English as a second or third language. Sunyoung, how was it for you coming to the first APNG camp?
I was very nervous because I could only understand about 30% of what was happening during the event. My English grammar and reading were at a decent level, but my listening, speaking, and writing skills were very weak due to the exam-focused English education system in South Korea. Using another language is so difficult, especially when you are a beginner. You constantly have to think about using the correct words and grammar. I'd like to ask you to reflect on your own experience of learning a foreign language for the first time.
So along those lines, I have two questions for you. The first one is, how many of you are tired of using English? It's been a few days since we started this camp, so this may reflect how you are thinking about English right now. Or some of you might ask yourselves, how many of you are tired from using English? So these two sentences are very similar, but you can see just with two different words, the meaning of the sentence can change. English is notorious for having little words like of, in, on, at. It can make it very difficult for learning. But with lots of time and experience, you can definitely improve and acquire these words. But luckily, these kinds of structures do not create major communication problems. However, let's look at another situation to help us think about our relationship with English. And I should tell you that this video that I'm going to show you is actually, the first part is in German. You don't really need to understand that, but look carefully at their communicative interaction.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, Mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
Das hier ist
Okay, please think about your own answers to these two questions. What communication problems occurred? How could these problems be resolved?
So many of you were probably thinking, oh, it's the Coast Guard that doesn't understand English very well. However, that's only part of the problem. Since communication is a two-way or multiple way interaction, both parties need to make themselves understood. So the other party could have helped the German Coast Guard by rephrasing the question or maybe asking follow-up questions. However, all of the burden laid on the German Coast Guard to understand. So anyway, let's consider how people think about English further. So let me introduce you to this concept of world Englishes. Have any of you heard about this movement called world Englishes? Well, throughout history, English has been thought of as belonging to Great Britain and other English-speaking countries, such as the US and Canada. However, one movement to challenge this is the concept of world Englishes. So you can imagine that every community has their own version of English. For example, in Korea, we have Konglish. There's also Singlish from Singapore, Japlish in Japan. Um, so just to give you an idea of what that looks like, if you look at this map here, you can see that there's different colors for green. The darker green is for the countries where English is spoken as a native language. And then there are countries in the lighter green where English is spoken as an official or a lingua franca. And then there's the rest of the world where English may or may not have any kind of official status. So to go a little bit deeper, we have what's called the inner circle. So this dark black circle here, and this would be those native English speaking countries. Okay, and you can see considerable number of speakers who speak English as their native language. And then we move on to the outer circle. All right, there are many countries involved here, and as you can probably guess, these are all countries that had a history of colonization. So English is part of their school system, as well as part may or may not be their official language. And then we've got the expanding circle. Okay, and this is where we have other countries. I've just listed some Asian countries here, but this represents the majority of the world where English is learned in school and it's spoken as an additional language that probably does not have official status, but is regularly taught in the school systems.
So, there are an estimated 350 million native speakers of English and about 2 billion non-native speakers. As you can see, non-native speakers far outnumber native speakers. This means you are more likely to interact with non-native English speakers than with native speakers.
Right. So just to wrap up about World Englishes, while it recognizes different varieties of English, it still categorizes people by native versus non-native speakers, just like these other versions of English. English as a foreign language, you probably learned, or also English as a second language that you can find in Canada or the United States, where immigrants go to live and learn English. So these kind of labels are very divisive in that there is a divide created between native and non-native speakers. And sometimes it can lead to the feeling that you're just never comfortable with English. It's not your language. So what I suggest is a concept that's called English as an international language. And here, English as an international language is a different way of looking at our relationship with English. It recognizes that users set the standards or the cultural norms. It's not the native speaking or the so-called inner circle that sets the standards. So I encourage you, whether or not you are a beginner or someone who has used English for a long time, to consider thinking of English as an international language, one that belongs to everyone. Even though English is for everyone, there are still some challenges that we can run into. And some further concepts about English as an international language is that they're used globally and locally, no longer connected to the inner circle, and English is embedded in the culture of the community that uses it. Okay. Sorry. So what about other communication problems?
So, even if we start seeing English as an international language that belongs to everyone, there are still other challenges we need to think about. For example, bias and discrimination based on race, ethnicity, or accent can create real barriers in communication. Sometimes people might be judged not by what they say, but by how they look or how they sound. These kinds of biases can make it even harder for people to feel confident or respected when using English, especially in international or professional settings. So, as we talk about English as a shared language, we should also think about how to create more inclusive and respectful communication spaces where people aren't expected to sound like native speakers and where different ways of speaking are seen as valid and valuable. So we're going to show you two examples, both featuring former and current US President Donald Trump speaking with the news reporters. Here's the first one.
I want to know what is your idea about Italy, if you want to make the same thing.
Can you talk a little louder? You have a beautiful voice, but you're not, in these days, you speak. Where are you from?
Italy.
From Italy. Oh, I love Italy.
Okay, now let's take a look
want
at
to-
the second example.
Mr. President, people in India would be welcoming your decision to extradite Tahabur Rana to
I can't understand a word he's saying.
Mr. President,
Why was one interaction successful and the other one unsuccessful? Think about your own answers to this question. Why?
So even though English is an international language with many varieties and uh, some varieties are more valued than others, and there seems to be a hidden ranking where European Englishes are above Asian Englishes. In addition to these social factors, I have one example that I want you to think about as well. Oh. So here's an experiment from Donald Rubin. It's quite old, but it's a classic study that reveals our perceptions about language. So the first, in this experiment, there are two groups. So in this first group, you can imagine that it takes place in a university lecture hall with one group of students from the same university, all English speakers from the US. And then they see a picture, much like this woman here standing in front of the lectern, and they're going to listen to an audio recording of this woman delivering a lecture. Okay. So then we have the second group. Okay. The second group is also made of university students. It's the same setting, and they're going to see this picture of an Asian woman, much like the first picture, but the only difference is that it's an Asian woman. Okay. And so they are going to listen to the same audio recording as group one. The only thing that is different is the picture of the woman that they see. So I would like to ask you, which group do you think had better reading comprehension? Group one or two? And keep in mind that they are listening to the same recording. They are only seeing a picture of different images, a white woman and an Asian woman. Why do you think this? So you can imagine that even though they had the same listening, group one actually had the better listening comprehension. And like some of you may have guessed, it's because that they perceived this woman as having better English. And when asked about if they heard an accent, more students in group two said that they had heard an accent in this recording. So you can see that just the race or the ethnicity of a speaker can influence how communicative interactions can take place. So what I want you to end with as you think about your own relationship with English is thinking of communication as a joint effort. Our hope is that you will view communication as not in this way where you see one person carrying the load, but more as this way where two people or more are working together in carrying out the communication. Okay. Sometimes it's considered that the person who's less proficient in English must make themselves understood. However, communication, if we think of it, if we want a successful interaction, then both speakers have to work together to make themselves understood and to understand each other. So we hope that you will consider the challenges of using English as an international language and work toward meaningful communication.
So, don't see English as a weakness or a barrier. See it as a tool for communication. And like any tool, we can get better at using it through practice, just like we are doing here at the APNG camp. Because you were brave enough to join this camp and communicate with others in English, you are already gaining the benefits it offers. Learning foreign languages, including English, gives us more opportunities to expand our world, connect with the diverse people, learn about other cultures, and grow. So let's keep up the good work with English as an international language.
Thank you.
Thank you.